John is the CTO and Chief AI Officer at Dell Technologies.
It's about applying these technologies to the most impactful processes and the most important parts of your business to bend your definition of productivity.
What are some of the emerging trends that Dell's closely watching?
You will have an infinite set of opportunities with AI.
You are listening to the AI with Maribel Lopez podcast, or AI with ML. If this is your first time listening, thank you for joining. The AI with Maribel Lopez podcast is brought to you by the Data for Betterment Foundation. This podcast shares the stories of the people behind the new world of data and AI. What are they creating, and why does it matter? If you like this episode, please subscribe so you can easily find the podcast again. You can find the video version of this podcast at youtube.com at AI with Maribel Lopez. You can also share your feedback and ideas with me on X, also known as Twitter, and LinkedIn. All links are in the show notes. Extended show notes, episodes, and transcripts can be found at lopezresearch.com/podcast. I hope you'll enjoy the show.
Hi, this is Maribel Lopez, and we are back with the AI with Maribel Lopez podcast. I am at the Dell Technologies Summit, and I'm super excited to be here with John Roese. John and I have known each other and spoken over the years about all the best and most interesting trends and changes that are happening in the world, and AI is clearly one of them. For those of you that might not know, John is the CTO and Chief AI Officer at Dell Technologies, so it's a pretty big role, John. Congratulations on that. It's a pretty interesting time. I thought maybe we could get started by just talking about, you're talking to a lot of enterprise customers. So what's Dell's vision for enterprise AI, and how does it align with the overall enterprise strategy you've been working on?
Sure. I mean, the first thing to realize is that, the AI market isn't a singular market. There's a bunch of traditional AI stuff still going on, and there's this gigantic training market that we're very active in that's building foundation models. And then we get to enterprise. And what's important to recognize, the enterprise AI market isn't about AGI or ASI or any of those things. It's actually kind of, I won't say boring, but it's very pragmatic. It's about applying these technologies to the most impactful processes and the most important parts of your business to bend your definition of productivity. If you're a commercial company, it's your profit, it's your revenue, it's your customer acquisition. And so, it really boils down to the fact that if you're going to be successful in enterprise AI, you actually have to narrow your scope to really be focused on the things that matter, the things that will make you more competitive, more successful. And that very much aligns. We've always been pretty pragmatic. We were sometimes accused of doing the boring stuff. We build infrastructure, we make computers, we kind of the foundational technology, and we think that the enterprise AI cycle, while we don't think it's boring at all, is very, very targeted at process improvement, productivity improvement. And if we do that at a global scale and move 30% of the work into the machine layer and completely bend the curve in productivity globally, this has profound implications and turns into a very interesting market.
Yeah, I love some of the things you talked about. There was a lot of discussion today about how Dell used it internally and how they tried to map back and align to these business use cases, which I think one of the big benefits that we're starting to see with organizations like yourself is you guys build the technology, you use the technology, you find practical ways for people to do it. And I loved you used a term, get them out of POC prison, which I thought was brilliant because we had a lot of wild POCs. I think people approached AI the wrong way, which makes sense because it was the first time that they said, hey, we could do something like completely different. Like, what do you think we should do? What could we do? And there was a lot of what could we do? And then when we were done with what could we do, we're like, okay, we spent a bunch of money and we came out with no ROI and management's disenchanted with the whole AI thing and we got to go back to it. So here we are. But you're out there talking to people every day. What are some of the biggest challenges you see for enterprise AI adoption and maybe some perspective on how Dell's helping businesses through those challenges, right?
Yeah, let me tell you kind of a joke. I think it's funny, but we'll see if it works. But one of the things
because there's a tech humor category. It's like dad humor.
Oh, tech humor. Yeah, this is definitely tech humor. This
humor,
requires your geek flag to be quite visible. So one of the things that we realized is, you described it, there was this kind of random ideation of AI is going to do magic for me. And I kind of joked that what we discovered is all those conversations that happen at the business level without any grounding in reality that came up with these ideas, I was trying to figure out, what the qualification to be in that meeting was. And I think it was that everybody in the meeting had to have seen at least one episode of Star Trek. And because people went in there, I mean, we had people like
me up,
proposing,
Scotty.
yeah, they were proposing things like, I want the holodeck. It's like, that's not what it does. It's not even grounded. But really what that led us to is we realized early on, nobody knew what the technology was, but we had this feeling that it could do magic. And so we started talking about doing magic. The thing that has reversed now, especially within Dell, because we had all that going on. That's how we came up with 800 to 900 use cases, and many of them were quite out there. The thing that reversed it over the last 2 years is now we have actual reference architectures, we have product, we have technology, we have platforms, what we describe as we have capabilities. Imagine replaying that discussion. Instead of going in and saying, I want magic to happen in my Salesforce, imagine if the dialogue went as follows. We have figured out the foundational capabilities that we will have. We will have an engine that allows us to take any proprietary data and convert it into generative outcomes. That's called a RAG-based chatbot. We will have an engine that allows us to take software development and automate it. We have another engine that will allow us to take any of our content and either find it or, in fact, refactor it to create new content. That's a content engine. Or maybe we'll have a platform that allows us to create distributed chunks of AI that will work together as an ensemble to do digital skills. That's an agentic architecture. And if we laid that out, so that's the bounds of the capabilities. Now what would you like to do with it? You get to much more realistic use cases. And unfortunately, we're kind of doing that in reverse. We're starting with the infinite set of possibilities, and then we're having to triangulate down to the things that are doable. But now we're at a point that as people build, and Dell has done this, build out a mature set of AI capabilities, you can now scope the discussion around the art of the possible, so your crawl and walk phase projects are actually very implementable almost immediately. And that allows for speed, realistic implementations.
Yeah, I think that the whole concept of linking it to a business process, trying to improve a business process, requires you to think, we go directly to technology. So we had this whole model myopia thing we were going for a while, like, the large language models, what are we going to use, which one, what kind of infrastructure? And it was before we got to the problem of what are we trying to do? And like so many things, it's like, hey, sometimes you need a hammer, sometimes you need a nail, and you don't know that if you don't know the use case. So I think we've really gotten much more pragmatic about that. And I like where you were going with it, because you can start to say that there are these categories that we can add value in at different parts of the organization. And the other thing that you were saying earlier that I think is so important is tying it to how organizations have a secret sauce.
Yeah.
And, it's going to be their secret sauce thing that's going to have the outsized proportion. So maybe it's certain roles that they apply it to. Maybe they're really good at sales. Maybe it's about their engineering process, or maybe it's about their supply chain. Like, there's different places it could be applied. So I like that a lot. So what have been some of the lessons that you've learned as an early pioneer of both building, deploying, and adopting the technology internally?
Yeah, there's a long list. And actually, one of the advantages of us being customer zero in this very dynamic space is we are learning things so our customers don't have to learn them.
Yeah.
They don't have to go through this. I mean, I would tell you that, the first obviously is you will have an infinite set of opportunities with AI, and the most important learning is to decide where to prioritize, to know what, as I say, what makes you special. What is the thing that if you bend the curve for your company, it will make you win? At Dell, it's our supply chain, our Salesforce, our engineering capability, and our services capability. Those are the ones that matter. And so it helps us have a very clear North Star. Many people don't know that, and they don't realize it's super important to AI. The other is the process in which you evaluate these ideas. Everybody kind of is developing those. The order of operations matter. And it turns out you waste a lot of time if you put the wrong evaluation criteria too early. We made this mistake. We sent all of our ideation ideas kind of as random, unformed ideas to our legal organization.
I'm sure they love that.
Oh, they were
like,
super
sure,
thrilled about this. And,
we'll say yes to that. No.
Oh, and the problem is, they tried their best, but if you send an unvetted technical idea that doesn't even have a coherent architecture on it to a legal team, the answer is always maybe. They weren't allowed to say no. That's one of the things we told them. We said, you can't just say no, but you got to basically at least entertain it. And they would say, well, in almost every example, you can experiment, but you can't use any proprietary data. You have to keep it on-prem, and you can't actually have any business impact. And that was a yes. And so what we realized is, hey, that's the wrong order of operations. You can't go to legal with something you haven't even decided is important, haven't decided what the impact is, or what the technical architecture is. And so we reversed that whole thing. In fact, the last thing that happens now, as we evaluate an idea, is legal review. The first thing that happens is, does it have an ROI? because we care about ROI. If it doesn't have an ROI, it isn't without value, but it's an experiment. Keep it over in the experimental sandbox. It doesn't go into production.
The experimental sandbox money, right?
Yeah, with that has a finite budget and a
yes.
very specific
Choose
amount of
wisely,
capacity.
yeah.
We have this many GPUs to use, and you can use it for whatever you want within this bounds, but there is no production grade system there. And so you start with that, and then you get into this discussion of does it actually align to modern Dell, what the company is trying to do? Is it one of our strategic imperatives? These are non-technical criteria, but they're very useful to do up front. And then the third one, which was an order of operations, which is hard for a lot of customers because they might not have such a team, is you do have to have a team of technical experts. They don't have to be people who can build AI systems, but they have to understand how to recognize what's the best template or technology to use. Is this a candidate for a RAG-based chatbot? Is it a coding assistant problem? Is it an agentic problem? And the idea is you want to basically make that decision quickly in the process. And then after that, once you know what you're doing and that it's important and what the impact's going to be, then you can send it to legal and security and see if it's going to meet your compliance, regulatory, and risk profile. And that order of operations was the learning we had, and we kind of found that most customers kind of just randomly did some of those things, but didn't think about how to do it efficiently. But when we're talking about hundreds of ideas, you got to figure out a very clean way to shunt the ones that are never going to get there very early in that process.
Another thing came up in the partner panel. I won't name the partner, but I just thought it was such a great line that it's worth sharing. And that's the concept that we all had this influx of requests from board members and other folks about, like, are you doing Gen AI, right? And the fact that you did a Gen AI chatbot as, deeming that success, you're done, was, it's a really good, like, we all did that, right?
Yeah.
We're like, okay, we rolled out some Gen AI thing, we're good,
Yeah.
check. It's like, there's more to it than
Exactly.
that, right? So,
Well, in fairness, I talked to a lot of customers, and we're somewhat of a support network because no one got this perfectly right. We're just learning as we go, and almost universally, anybody who's intellectually honest about it, at some point they kind of just reacted at the technical level and forgot about the business priority, and that's where these kind of random acts of AI occurred, and sometimes it was the board. I'm on boards, and I deal with our board, and they're very interested in AI, and they're very clear that we better not miss it. So there is pressure, but the reaction to that should not be a random act of technology. It should be a well-thought-out approach of using the technology for business outcome, which, by the way, is the normal board discussion. But it is strange how board pressure and executive pressure causes random acts of AI, and that actually wastes a lot of time and energy. It creates some learnings, but it's not the right approach. And so we've been very clear, actually, even in Dell, the way we set this up. The chief AI officer, I'm the CTO of the company. I report to Jeff and Michael. I am not a junior person. I have authority, and my job is to make sure that we manage through this process in a way that we can make strategic decisions and we can push back on behaviors that appear to be coming from on high, but aren't really what they're asking for. Because the goal everybody's aligned on is business success, including the board. And it's sometimes tough for a lower level technical team to push back on the board, but they should, because the right answer is pick the right problem, solve it the right way, get to a productivity improvement. That is the thing the board will be most happy about and the shareholders will love.
I know I said I'd only ask you 4 questions, but
Okay.
I think I'd be remiss if I didn't put in this one, and this is around the AI factory. We had talked about, like, is the AI factory just marketing? But I thought you made a really good strategic comment about how to approach the infrastructure, because there could be a lot of different types of infrastructure. So maybe you could just, like, recap around the minimum viable concept.
Yeah. What it turned out, what we learned, we like everybody else had hundreds and hundreds of ideas and use cases, and we obviously widowed them down to a smaller number that were very targeted. But even then, there were a lot of them. And so our goal on the infrastructure side, from the 2 questions, what are you doing and how do you do it? On the how do you do it side, our goal was to put in place the minimum sufficient AI infrastructure to address the maximum number of possible use cases. And the data kind of led us there because we started seeing patterns. When we looked at 360 AI ideas and projects, half of them were just about converting proprietary data into generative outcomes. That's a RAG-based chatbot. If you put one in place and use it for 150 projects, that is a way better approach than building 150 RAG-based chatbots. And so that's the kind of guidance. You will find in your data, if you look deeply in these use cases, that they fall into patterns, and the patterns lead you to the minimum sufficient infrastructure platforms, and that will give you a tremendous, tremendous efficiency and simplicity at a time where you desperately need it.
Absolutely. That's great. Thank you. I think that's going to be a really good guidepost for folks. Closing question. CTO, Chief AI, what are some of the emerging trends that Dell's closely watching that might apply to enterprises moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we have lots of things going on, but the number one for me is this emergence of agentic architectures, this idea of
Here for
agents.
agentic architecture is a concept, right?
I was on an interview with a financial network a couple months ago. I was joking with them. I said, here's your word of the day. We have a word of the month or something, and the new term of art that none of us used a year ago is the word agentic. And now the problem is it means a lot of things to a lot of people, but let me give you a kind of a high-level view of it. The idea today is that we have essentially relatively monolithic AI systems, large language models, and they operate when we interact with them. They don't do anything unless you're interacting with that AI system. They answer questions, they create content, but you trigger them to do something in most cases. Agentic architectures are kind of two things. One, the first is they generally can be autonomous, meaning they can sit there and do stuff without you even telling them to do stuff. If its job is to sit there and always monitor something, create content, do some task, that's great. We are exploring areas like, imagine an agent that is a storage administrator. It's not just a configuration tool. It's not just a management tool. You actually literally put it live, and it watches your storage environment, it makes decisions around it, and does about 80% of the work that a human being would do, including reasoning, which is the new piece of this idea of reasoning networks and reasoning chains. And so as we think about agentic, the two things that change are, one, AI moves from being kind of static and reactive to being proactive and autonomous. The second thing that happens, though, is agentic allows us to decompose the monolith into smaller ensembles of AIs. So instead of having one big black box of magic that does everything, you have an agent that was specifically tuned to be a programmer, and one that was a researcher, and one that was a content creator, and one that was a storage administrator, and one that was a therapist. And there's lots of different, they have roles, and they become digital skills. The beauty of that, which makes us really excited about it, isn't just that they're very specialized, but you can combine them, much like you'd combine a team of human beings to create work. And then the last thing that really makes us excited is one of the big concerns people have with AI today is transparency and influence. If it's a big black box of magic, you don't know what's going on inside. We can't tell you what's going on inside of it. If it's a collection of agents, I still can't tell you what's happening in each agent technically, but I know that if the process always produces crappy code, but there's 10 agents involved in it, then go fix the coding agent, because that's where your problem is. More importantly, because agents speak using human language, you can insert human beings into the ensemble.
And they can talk to each other.
Yeah, you can have 5 agents working with 3 people, and they're all talking human to each other, and they can actually work as a collective, whether the humans are the boss or whether the humans are actually doing some of the work. We built these systems already in the early days. All of that just makes it intellectually more understandable to the human side of the house, to how we incorporate this into the business. In fact, I tell people, if we get to agentic in the way that we've just described it, you really just have a collection of digital workers that you can spin up out of whole cloth, and you can apply them to very specific skills, and you can integrate them with your existing people. And the level of creativity and flexibility is significantly advanced from where we are today. Funny enough, what are they built on? Large language models, small language models. They're just building on the technology we have, but they're now operating in a very different way. And then the bonus prize for us is you can distribute them, which means some of those agents can run out on the device that you're walking around with, and
right.
some of them can be in your data center, which seems like a really efficient model.
Perfect. I think that discussion of agentic that you just gave was probably one of the clearer ones I've heard in the past couple months.
Lots
So
of confusion in that one right now.
Really happy to see that
Yep.
we're kind of coming to what's
Yeah.
the value? How are they
Right.
going to work with each other? Orchestration's going to
Yep.
be a big deal. There's a lot going on there. Well, John, I know that you've been really busy, and I really thank you for your time and attention today. And thanks, folks, for listening. And we'll get back to you soon. Cheers.
Thank you for listening. Additional content can be found at lopezresearch.com/podcasts. Until next time, wishing you all the best.